Start with this slide because I think Andy actually says drivers as troublemakers. I'd like to say transformers, in that we're looking to make this transformational, because at the end of the day you could say it's about the obesity strategy, you could say it's about all of the benefits of physically active learning, but actually this is what we're in danger of turning our children into, data basically, and that's the obsession in schools, and actually that's what researchers have got to battle with, because it's all well and good explaining to head teachers and schools that this is all really important, but actually we've gone so far down almost a system where it is almost now where we're actually, it's all about knowledge, it's all about outcomes in reading, writing and maths, that it isn't just the obesity and the physical activity is going to improve those. We've got to look beyond that. So I want to talk to you about three things. A leap, small steps and a sense of balance. And the leap, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, the leap is this, because I've talked to head teacher conferences, I've talked in cluster meetings, I've been to PE conferences, and people come away and go, really like to talk about PE and sport. I get really frustrated because I'm like, actually that is part of the ingrained problem in all of this, is that we have to change what that looks like. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, as I say, you all know the benefits of physical activity and where that leads us, but it's this bit, the spark, the ignition, the inspiration, because that is everything. What I mean there is I don't want to mention a sense of initiative either, but that is, I don't know if any of you read The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. Write it down if you haven't. It's a brilliant read. It's actually about talent spotting and how did Brazil become the best football team in the world and all these things. And he mentions three things. He mentions deep practice, which is doing something in a really deep way over and over and over again. Excellent coaching model, but he mentions the word ignition. And that is all about, we call it Thorner, inspiration. And it's that thing that makes you want to do the deep practice, that makes you want to go that extra mile, if I can use that, that's pun. But actually, think back to experiences you've had. If you've had that ignition, that inspiration, that motivation, you want to do it again and again and again. If we make all of our children do something, some of them will hate us for it. They might become fitter, and again, this could be anything, and it could be, I'll make them skip every day. Again, making them skip every day won't make them love this, it won't form habits for life. And we have to change what physical activity looks like, and actually this 2 hour of PE a day plus break times, we've got to look at how that completely changes so we can move forward. So what do we need to do? Well, it's got to be small steps, because actually this is, for a lot of schools, transformational. And with anything, if you do all of the research about making those positive changes, you've got to look at what you're working with, and you've got to think about that continuous professional development. And what we did is I threw it back to staff and said, okay, you may not be confident in PE and sport, you may have hated physical activity, you may still hate it. What can we do to benefit our children? And what we looked at was active breaks led by the teacher, and we'll talk about that in a second, and timetabling. And here's the question, how is that physically active learning? Well, the learning is actually, again, if you look at children today, from experience and talking to lots of other practitioners, is in a way, a lot of our children don't know how to play anymore. So what we're doing is we've introduced to our timetable 2 slots a day where children have what we call active breaks. This is on top of their playtime and their lunch times, and basically they have a bit of a timetable that's generated with the children, and it changes based on the children's feedback, which is how can we make these really fun? The teachers get involved, and actually what we've had is, you'll be delighted to hear this, we've got an NQT from Leeds Beckett, who's done the PGC with PE, and his active breaks are going viral across the school. Obviously what you're doing at the heart here is actually having an impact back in schools. And what we're now seeing is teachers going, oh, what was that cone challenge you did with yours? I'm going to steal that. And it's actually having a really positive impact, and we're also then seeing improved behaviours, both in terms of when they come back into the classroom, which will impact on learning, and also an improvement in their focus, because we get them back in. We almost have a bit of a 2-minute meditation now, because it's that how do you go from the fast to the slow, so that then you can actually refocus. And all sorts of things there. Super movers is something, obviously, if it's completely pouring down outside, teachers go, what can we do? And you've got to have other solutions that work. I think we've got Ian from iMoves here today, again, a similar thing. And one of the things I think it is, it's about drawing on all that resource out there, but using the children to give you the feedback on what is inspiring them. I keep using this word, inspiring them to want to do more of it. Yes, we have a track, yes, we do lots of running around it, but in this case, actually, our school mascot is being transported around by the children, which they absolutely love, and they set themselves different challenges around that. I'm going to move on from the small steps to this idea of a sense of balance, because, again, staff in schools are dealing with a lot of different things, and actually well-being, again, you'll hear as an agenda being bandied around. And one of the things we've talked to staff about is you've got to see physical activity as part of a much bigger picture on well-being. This is stolen, by the way, it's not created by Fauna. London Borough's created this for adults, actually, but we've stolen it. We've talked about this idea of the wheel of well-being, and actually physical activity is almost the start and end of that wheel, because it will have a really positive influence on all of those other things. And what it's helped with our staff, who I would say had a lot of barriers to physically active learning when we started doing this, is we've now got to a place where, because of these little things like the active breaks, and because we've got one or two pioneering teachers who are willing to take risks in their classroom learning, is they're now at a place, quite literally, where we can start to look at environments and approaches and start to think about, well, actually, do we use that? Andy talked about maths and English in the morning. Actually, the hall's never timetabled them, so do we now timetable, which we've done at Fauna, active learning into that for different year groups, so they can go into the hall and do their maths lesson in a more active way, or they can go in and do part of their literacy lesson in a more active way. And what we're now finding is we're starting to get that swell of, actually, this is working, and it's starting to have an impact. Don't get me wrong, we're early stages in the journey, but it's having a massive, massive impact. So talking of place, I'm going to hand over to Richard.
Right, well, last year I introduced myself as a burglar under the bed. I don't need to do that anymore. I'm now a scientist and a troublemaker. So I'm going to talk to you about making trouble in the classroom and talk about how you can use your environments to promote physical activity in the school. So the idea is to give you kind of practitioner tips rather than overloading you with research, because that's not what the angle that we're coming from. So environments ultimately can drive the behaviours. So it's about making your classrooms deliver the obvious choice, the thing that you want to happen. So if you want children to move more, if you're a classroom practitioner, you need to set your classroom up so that it facilitates that. The logical place to start, to explain this to you, is in the early years. If we look at the early years framework, for those of you that perhaps with school-based backgrounds, you can see that their rooms, look at the top picture, not the bottom one that Google provided me with. An early years environment promotes personal, social, emotional and physical development within there, flexible spaces and provisions so that children can move, they can explore, they can interact. At 7 years old, that all changes, and what's happening is we are seeing typically lots of images like this. Google provided that for me. It's not from any of the schools that I've worked in, fortunately, but they do exist. There's a table and chair for every child, and it's driving down the levels of activity that are going on in schools. So, tips really from practice that we want to share with you is the idea of looking at spaces, provision and places. And if you go into any majority of schools, they can talk to you all day about how they'll increase physical activity for MVPA, so how they will get children more highly active in break times, in lunch times, in the segmented day that Andy's referred to as well in his research, but often neglecting how you move children from sedentary time into low-level physical activity, and that's where we feel that your classroom environment can do that. And the way you can do that is to target reducing that sedentary time, but ideally identifying non-discretionary time, so time where children don't have a choice over what they're doing. Classroom learning, they've got choices within their learning, but ultimately in that classroom, as a teacher, you're driving what's going on in there, and if it's a physically active approach, the children are all engaging in physical activity, albeit at low level. Activity at break times and lunch times is just going to maintain the activity levels that are already there for those that are choosing to be active. Also, by doing it in your classroom time, you're also planning for movement, and then movement as a byproduct of high quality learning, rather than actually wedging movement into there for the sake of wedging it in. If it's part of the learning process, it makes it much more purposeful. So tip number one, classroom layout, as I've touched on, make sure there's space and movement for children to collaborate with each other, so you can embrace group work. Target reducing the amount of time that children are sitting and get them up and moving, whether that just be standing or walking around the room or working in groups. Number 2, you provision. Movement is a great byproduct of collaboration. If you can get collaborative practices in there and tools to promote that, we use things such as talk for learning cards that help our children work in groups, but that also produces movement. Furniture that makes writing and reading that little bit more physically demanding. Flexible seating, less chairs, less tables, so there's more space for them to move in. These are just some examples from some schools. The middle one's not, that's another Google one, thank you for that. And then finally, 3rd tip, flexible learning spaces. So be prepared to take your learning outside. The greatest resource in any classroom is the teacher, and I think often we hide behind that safety net of being in your classroom. But if good teachers can teach children anything, anywhere, because they are the resource. So be fearless and approach open spaces such as your green spaces, your playgrounds, your corridors. We've got standing zones in the corridors where children can use as active provision spaces to go outside, continue with their classroom learning, rather than sitting in a classroom where there might not be as much space. And look at using high quality resources to make that happen. Here we're using Tactivate for an active maths lesson. Looks like a PE lesson, it's a 50-minute active maths lesson. Say up at the top, Tactivate's being used again with us, and then up in the middle here, they're doing calculation of Bob maths through generating random numbers using curling stones, a little bit like darts, but hitting random numbers on there. So there's a lot going on just by going to different spaces. How do we make it the norm? Ultimately, there needs to be acknowledgement in policy. Until there's some greater health accountability, which has kind of already been touched on, it's very difficult for head teachers to make that leap in those first steps and to make it part of their day-to-day life in school. So greater health accountability is needed. Physically active learning to be promoted in addition to PE and sport. They still need to stay, they're absolutely vital. I'm a PE teacher by trade. I do not want to lose any of that, but we need to enhance it with physically active learning. And also, we need the support of research to influence what's going on at the top level. Without it and working collaboratively, it's not going to work. And Ian's just going to touch on schools very briefly.
Yeah, just to finish off, because it actually links to what Nicola was talking about, which was we've been thinking a lot about this idea of a lot of the time we're targeting the head teachers, which I still think is absolutely crucial, and in terms of that policy level is obviously vital. But actually, one of the things I've been talking to some focus groups about is this idea of CPD means continual professional development, and actually, in terms of teachers and them coming into school, are we arming them with the tools to be able to deliver physically active learning successfully? So what our real goal is to develop that, and we're in the process of doing it, a CPD programme that will work for trainee teachers, will work for NQTs, will work for recently qualified teachers and beyond, where we can work with them and actually then they can work with each other, because this is about really spreading the message, whereby over a period of time, they're not just looking at, we've had a good inset session and off we go. There's a continual reflection on about how they're adapting their practice step by step to integrate this more into their normal classroom environment. Because actually, the best bit of feedback we've had from children is their learning should just be fun and engaging all the time, and they shouldn't really be thinking about, is it physically active learning or not? We've got it right if it's more physically active learning, and in a way they don't even know about it. So that part of the CPD programme is happening with a few schools in Huddersfield this year. Really exciting. The other thing we're looking for is partners, because part of what we want to do is work with research, work with resource providers out there. Obviously, we're very lucky to have Bryn and Tactivate as part of that. 30 seconds or something. But I do think, and again, Nicola referred to it, it's about actually making this really clear for teachers and practice as to where they get the very best resources in CPD. Thank you very much for listening. We're running a Cook Ritual CPD Day next Thursday. If you want to know more, see Bryn and Richard.